Now let's continue with the remaining part of our JavaScript, that is asynchronous JavaScript. Okay, so asynchronous JavaScript is very important, and asynchronous in the context of computing and programming refers to the execution of tasks or operations that do not occur sequentially or one after another. For example, you have one process which is taking 5 minutes. Okay, which is taking 5 minutes, and then you have some other process which is taking 10 minutes, and then you have some another process which is taking 10 seconds. So for example, these two processes are very important. But they're taking more time, you can see, and this process is also important and it's taking very less time. So by default, we have JavaScript as synchronous. That means first of all, whatever is the first process, it would be completed. Then second process would be completed. Then third process would be completed. By asynchronous, I simply say that the process would be still there, but the process which would take less amount of time would be completed first. Okay, so if it takes less time, it would be finished first, and so on. Okay, so it would still run, but first of all, other processes which are taking less time, they would also be completed, so that other processes don't need to wait. Okay, so there might be some cases where you want the process to wait, then you can make by default JavaScript as synchronous, but there are separate methods which make the JavaScript as asynchronous. So for asynchronous, that means to just cover the least amount of time first, to just cover the processes and let other processes which are taking more time to be completed later on. This is known as asynchronous. That means your order might change. Okay, synchronous means whatever come first must go out first. Okay, that means if the process is taking 1 hour and next process is just taking 1 second, first the 1 hour would be completed, then the next 1 second process would be completed. That is known as synchronous. Asynchronous simply means whatever process which is taking less time would be completed first. That is, 1 second process would be completed first, and along with that 1 hour process would be completed, whatever time it would require, that is 1 hour. Okay, so that's how you perform the asynchronous. Now in the context of computing and programming, it refers to the execution of the task and operation that do not occur sequentially or one after the other in a synchronous behavior or blocking manner. Instead, asynchronous operations allow a program to perform tasks concurrently without waiting for the completion of each individual task before moving to the next one. This approach is particularly useful for handling time-consuming or potentially blocking operations such as network requests, file input-output, or user interactions without freezing or blocking the main thread of the execution. So asynchronous JavaScript is a fundamental aspect of the language. Especially in web development, it allows you to perform tasks concurrently without blocking the main thread, which is crucial for creating responsive and efficient application. So let's understand some implementations key concepts. So first of all, let's understand the callback functions. So callback functions are those functions that are passed as an argument to other functions and executed at a later time. For example, if I just say that we have a function, okay, we have a function, and let's say that the function name is fetch data. Inside this, I'm just passing a parameter named as callback. So callback would be a function called after the completion. I'm just saying that set timeout, and inside this you would just pass the value for callback, and inside this you can simply pass any value for the callback. That means callback function, we have to create some callback function. Inside that function you would be providing this value, whatever data you calculated. For example, you are just calculating some sum. Okay, so let sum equals 1 plus 2 plus 3. There is some complex calculation done here. Once this calculation is done, then I want to call something else. That means first of all, this fetch data function would be called. It would cover up some task. Once that task is completed, I'm going to return that value. So I'm just going to return that value. Okay, so I'm just going to send this value to whom? where I called this function. Okay, so it simply says, callback function simply says when you're calling one function inside another function. Okay, so you can simply say, if I now just call the fetch data function, okay, and I'm just saying once I resolve the data from fetch data function, I would just print that data. So I'm just saying that once the task from fetch data is completed, I'm getting some value from fetch data. What is that data? It's actually 6. Okay, I'm just returning some value 6. It's getting some value 6. Once I got that value 6, I would just simply show that value. That means if it's taking, suppose if it's taking 5000 milliseconds, that is 5 seconds. So after 5 seconds, once this is completed, then I would get some value. Okay, so this is known as callback. Okay, so callback is a function that you pass as an argument to another function. It gets executed. Okay, so you are just saying that this is a callback which acts as an argument. Once your task is done, after 5 seconds your task is done, you would get some value. That value would come inside this is an arrow function, right? Inside this I have passed an arrow function. So inside the fetch data I've actually passed an arrow function. You simply see, once I return once I get some value, that means after 5 seconds I would get some value inside this, then the next task would be done. So that's how callback is done. Okay, so this is obviously known as a synchronous behavior. So when you want things to be done in synchronous way, you can do it this way. Okay, now one more important method, that is promises. Okay, so first of all we covered callbacks. Now let's understand what is promises. So promise simply says I would return two types of values. Either the promise is completed or it's not completed. So you can simply say, we again have a method named as fetch data, and to create a promise you need to write new promise. Okay, so new promise, inside this I would simply say either promise would be resolved, that means promise would be fulfilled, or the promise won't be fulfilled, that is rejected. Okay, so resolve or reject. Now inside this I would just say set timeout, and I'm just saying that after some important time, after some time my promise would be completed. That is, suppose after 2 seconds my promise would be completed. So I'm just saying resolve, and I'm just saying let's say again we are just calculating something. So suppose let sum equals this, and you are just sending some response. Okay, so you are just sending the sum. So I'm just saying that if promise is completed, I'm just sending the resolve method. Okay, so if promise is completed, I'm sending the resolve method. That means resolve means successful. Okay, so I'm just saying that fetch data is called. If it's successful, then we have the dot then method. So you might have seen dot then dot catch. So if I receive resolve, then I would go inside then method and it would return whatever value we are receiving from the response. So after 2 seconds you would receive 6. But suppose if in case we have some error, so it would go inside catch. That means if we have something in the reject, it would go inside reject. That means in the catch. How would I go inside the reject? Suppose there is some problem here, and suppose if there is some problem, I would just say there might be some complex calculation, verification of user data, and so on. At the end you would be receiving some response. So I would just say, suppose there is some error, so I would just say reject and error, and I can just say error in fetching data. I'm just receiving this error. So once you receive this error, automatically you would come inside the catch case. Okay, so if you don't trust me, you can simply console and dot log, and you can just say I am in catch block. Okay, I'm in catch block. So you're just saying that after 2 seconds, if then doesn't work, I am in catch block because I'm getting the reject. Okay, so I would just print I'm in then block. So if everything is fine, resolve would work. In some cases resolve would work, in some cases reject would work. Reject simply means there is some error, so you would be receiving this in the form of reject. Okay, suppose there is something happening in node.js. Okay, this you would be writing this kind of code in node.js for performing some kind of backend verification and things like that, and you would be sending that data to front end. So suppose this is your front end and this is your backend. Okay, later on you would be learning MERN stack, so you would understand more about it. This is your backend which is doing some verification. For example, you are verifying user data, email and password. and you know that suppose the email and password is wrong, so from backend you would be sending some error, right? You would be sending some error. Once you receive that error, you are simply going to show that error, you're going to show that error. So this is the catch method. If there is some success message, so you would receive that in the form of resolve. So once success message is here, you're just inside the then block and then whatever you want to do. Okay, so that's how then and catch would work. Now one more important thing, that is async and await. Okay, so async and await is also very important. You would be seeing this a lot. So first of all, again you have a promise method. Again you have a promise method which does the same job, and I'm just saying as a response, I'm just saying data received. Okay, whatever you want to show, you can send this as a response. Now I am just creating a method, that is async method, which would be called async method would be called, and this simply says whatever data you would get inside this. So const equals a const data. You would be receiving data from what? From the function, right? You would be receiving data from the function. So I'm just saying after 2 seconds whatever value would come would automatically be get inside this data variable. Now I would just print this data variable. Okay, so whenever I call this function, it would give me the values. Okay, it would give me the values. But the benefit of this is, for example, just after this I'm just saying hello world. So first of all it would give me hello world, then it would give me data received. Why it's doing like this? For example, if I just make it 5 seconds, okay, so once you see this, you can see I'm calling the function first, then after this I'm calling hello world, but still it's first giving me hello world, then after this the function. This is known as the asynchronous process. How does this happen? I'm just saying that this is the async function. Async function simply means that I'm making the function asynchronous. Whenever I call the function, this is an asynchronous function. That means if it's taking time, do the process, but do other process also. What was the other process? The other process was hello world. So it did the other process also, and it also maintained the current process. Okay, so if it's taking time, it would maintain that and perform the next task also. Okay, so that's how you're going to write asynchronous operations, right? So I hope you understood what is asynchronous operation. Now what is await here? Await is like if I didn't do this, so it would just take some millisecond. If this is some time, suppose 5 seconds were taken, it won't wait for 5 seconds. Automatically undefined value would be here, promise would be pending, and you would just print that pending promise. Okay, so you can see I'm trying to print this, and you can see that I'm not getting anything. Okay, I'm not getting anything, although after 5 seconds your promise would be fulfilled, but you won't be getting anything inside this data value. So to actually fix this, you need to pass await, so that value would come automatically after 5 seconds. You know, you don't need to do anything. Okay, so after 5 seconds automatically value would come here, and you're just printing this. Okay, so you don't need for this function to be completed to do the next task, and once the value comes inside this, you're just showing the value. Okay, so that's how async and await would work, and it would actually help you a lot in some cases. Like for example, you're getting some data from backend, and you know that this is a very big data, for example some movie streaming and so on. So you see that some data is already there, or some images are there, some elements are there. So how do they come? They're just like, just show the elements. Once you receive the movie, just show the movie. It's like this. Okay, so you would be using this a lot in later on. Okay, so now let me just summarize this once. So callbacks versus promise versus async await. So callbacks can actually lead to callback hell, that is nested callbacks, making the code hard to read and maintain. So callbacks can sometimes lead to callback hell. That means you are calling one function inside the another function, so sometimes there is a mess. Okay, now promises offer better structure and error handling, but they can still result in complex chaining. Async await provides a more readable and structured way to work with asynchronous code, reducing callback hell and making the code more synchronous. So you will be always using this async a lot instead of this promises, or instead you'll be using this asynchronous methods a lot, async await. Instead of this, you can also use then catch, but this can actually become a bigger chain, like a lot then catch would be called later on. So it would become a very big chain, and it's not recommended to use callbacks because it can cause the callback hell. So either you would be using then catch or you would be using async await in asynchronous JavaScript a lot times. Okay guys, so I hope you understood how this works. Now one more important thing, how we are actually going to handle the errors. Okay, so very simple, it's actually very simple. Like suppose there is some error and you are going to handle the errors. In this case, how you're going to handle the error. So again, right now in the then catch, you are going to handle the error using the catch method. Okay, you know the catch method and you can just use catch to handle the error. That means there is no issue. But suppose you have an error after this and you were using async await, there is no then catch. So here we actually use try catch. Okay, here we actually use try catch. So again, I'm just creating the same function, just create the same function. So I'm just saying that try would contain the success part, but if there is any error, so you would receive the error and you can just print the error. Okay, so again it's very same. I'm just saying that inside the try part, try to get the value and print it. But if suppose this is having some error, this is having some error, that means you have received some reject from here, so automatically you would come in the catch case. So right now you can see after 5 seconds data received would be here. Okay, so let me just call this, it would work same. Or again it's asynchronous method, so it would work same. After 5 seconds you would automatically receive data. But suppose there is some problem, that is you are just saying, instead of this I am just saying reject and error in fetching data, so automatically the catch method would be called. Okay, automatically the catch method would be called after 5 seconds. So one more important thing, we have to define reject here. Okay, so as you can see everything is fine here. So try catch would be used inside async and await. Okay, so if you're not using then catch, so for handling the error you would be using try catch if you're talking about async and await. Okay, if you're talking about async and await, you would be using try catch. If you're not using async await, if you're just talking about direct results, so you can actually use then catch also. So both are same exactly, both would be really helpful whenever you are using these. Okay guys, so I hope you understood how these asynchronous operations really work in JavaScript, and you would be using these a lot in Node.js. Okay.